Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 15 of season 4 of Babylon 5, No Surrender, No Retreat. Enough is enough. Everyone's moving with a purpose, including ambassadors urgently called to an early morning meeting. Sheridan lays it on the line with Ivanova as Thunderbolts and Star Furies launch out. President Clark has attacked civilian targets and massacred thousands just to make a point. White Star patrols on the borders of the non-aligned worlds have cut incidents massively. Now there's a price tag. Tear up your mutual defence treaties with Earth and offer them no support other than humanitarian aid. Jakar notes that during the Shadow War, Earth did not come to their aid in any way, so they cannot expect that to go unanswered. Further, Ivanova asks for destroyer-class vessels to help defend the station. Anyone getting in between them and their campaign will be eliminated, from Proxima to Mars and onto Earth. They're taking their home back. Marcus sprints to the station with the data crystal. The Heracles, the Juno, the Pollux, the Nemesis, the Vesta, the Furies. Omega-class destroyers all, blockading Proxima 3 in what Ivanova notes is a very efficient manner. Try and escape, get shot down. Try and enter, get shot down. Sheridan smiles at mention of the Vesta and its commanding officer. The Heracles and the Pollux shot down the civilian transports as we saw in the last episode, meaning they're clearly Clark loyalists. Marcus says the colony is on the verge of surrender, with few supplies left. Sheridan wants to know more about how the others are behaving as regards civilians, so Marcus goes to gather more intel. Sheridan queries Franklin's progress with the captured telepaths. He can wake them briefly, but their implants are still in control. Sheridan tells him he needs as many of them as possible available to move as soon as Franklin can do it. Not for right now, but soon. Ivanova is concerned about the attack plan. Sheridan says they'll go in waves and try and isolate the known hostile ships. He says once we're in, we're in. No surrender, no retreat. Veer is woken from a less than pleasant dream by Garibaldi looking for Londo, who isn't around. Veer lets slip about the start of the campaign, not realising Garibaldi doesn't know, and assumes he's going to re-enlist to help fight for his homeworld. Garibaldi leaves Veer in little doubt that that isn't going to happen, not Sheridan's way anyway, and he leaves a confused Veer to his business. Furies and Thunderbolts continue to run defensive exercises outside C&C in the station. Corwin asks Ivanova how long she wants them to keep going, and basically, aside from mission fighters and refueling and rest periods, she wants all fighters on flybys continuously in case Clark's forces pay a hostile visit. She advises all fighters to update their friend or foe systems once a day and take no action unless an order is accompanied by the right code in case Earth tries to impersonate herself or Captain Sheridan. Trust Ivanova, trust yourself. Anyone else? Shoot 'em. That seems clear. Sheridan and Ivanova discuss deployments, with several White Star squadrons holding off Proxima 3's hyperspace beacon, while several others buzz Mars and Earth with a view to making Clark think a local assault is imminent, with the intended effect of bringing his forces closer to home as the Proxima assault begins. Smart thinking, but Ivanova is still uncertain about their ability to deal with the Omegas if they're all hostile. On that point, Marcus is with one of the standby squadrons and liaising with the Resistance. They upload information on non-hostile destroyers, but are coming under attack and need to fall back, so urge them to commit to whatever it is they're planning to do, sooner rather than later. Londo visits Jakar in his quarters for the first time ever, after letting him ring the bell several times with no response. They immediately start sparring, but Londo himself calls an end to that, saying it's an old habit, and they have both enjoyed much in the past 2 years, Jakar perhaps more than him acknowledges. He offers Jakar his thanks for everything he went through to free the Centauri people, whilst acknowledging, as Jakar confirms, that means next to nothing for Jakar, who was doing it for the sake of his own world only. And the respect Londo expresses for Jakar means even less to him. Londo says he can see Jakar isn't even willing to give him an inch, but he is trying to make amends for poor decisions in the past, and wants them both to sign a statement saying their governments support Sheridan's position, in the hope that it might sway others. Jakar offers no response, and when Londo tries to get him to have a drink with him as Jakar once offered him one just before they went to war, Jakar pours his back into the canteen. Londo leaves empty-handed. Sheridan and Ivanova address their pilots. They'll attack in 3 waves, with Ivanova cautioning them to check targets at close range to avoid friendly fire incidents. The Heracles and Pollux are hostile. Nemesis and Vesta considered not so, but the other 2 are unknowns. Them they'll ask to stand down or surrender, but they're to return fire if fired upon. Sheridan acknowledges asking them to go up against their own is a big ask, but they'll do their best to minimise casualties. As the forces gather, Corwin notes that White Star 2 has a new Babylon 5 logo paint job, asking Ivanova, won't they know it's him? To which she replies, that's the idea. The ships jump out. 3 White Stars drop in on the opposite side of the planet to the holding fleet, and the Nemesis and Pollux are sent to investigate. Marcus has joined Sheridan and White Star 2, and is puzzled the Heracles hasn't moved, but Sheridan figures that the known hostiles are keeping an eye on those less willing. Sheridan sends in his second wave through their own jump point, with the Heracles identifying them as Sheridan's forces and sending Vesta and Juno's fighters to intercept them, having said Sheridan's made a terminal error. Which is about the time he comes on the horn, offering them the option of standing down or leaving, given that they're in breach of treaty and following illegal orders. But he's not with the 2 groups they know about, and he opens up a 3rd attack vector by coming in through the local jump gate. The Heracles orders the Vesta and Furies to engage the rear targets, but Captain Mackie on the Vesta speaks to Sheridan to the fury of the Heracles' captain. Sheridan knows him from the academy, and they debate whether these orders are legal. The Vesta has yet to take any hostile action against civilians. Sheridan's forces have entered Heracles' firing solution, and its captain forces the issue by opening fire. Babylon 5 forces take hits, and this frees Sheridan's hand, ordering them to fire at will. Vesta does not support the Heracles as it's hit by Furies and White Stars. Unfortunately, Commander Philby on the Vesta fancies a promotion and holds Mackie at gunpoint under orders from the Heracles. The other Omegas are moving but not engaging, so whilst they focus fire on the Heracles and Pollux, Sheridan heads into the Furies to establish its intentions. They do not lock onto White Star 2 and are declared non-hostile as the Vesta's guns lock onto the ship and its fighters begin targeting them. Sheridan is reluctant to engage despite Marcus's warnings, but just as he is about to relent, Mackie advises that his second's promotion has been postponed by the crew and they are declaring themselves non-hostile. Shortly afterwards, the Juno leaves the system, leaving 3 active hostile Omegas. However, the Pollux makes the mistake of tagging a White Star on approach, and it tumbles out of control into the Pollux's launch bay, ultimately causing the Pollux's destruction, while Sheridan urges its crew to get to the life pods. The Nemesis is badly damaged and offers to surrender, leaving only the Heracles active. Sheridan issues an ultimatum that Captain Hall can't stomach, because it would mean him being held responsible for what's been happening in the system. He doesn't believe Sheridan will finish his crippled ship off if he doesn't surrender. His second in command, however, is far less certain, and orders her captain removed from the bridge in a mirror of what happened on the Vesta, except this captain doesn't get helped, and she surrenders her ship and returns control of Proxima 3 to its government, recalling all fighters. Marcus calls it a victory, but Sheridan doesn't see it that way. Too many have died on both sides, and this time they had surprise to their advantage. Next time won't be so easy. He wants to see the captains of the surviving ships in an hour to see if they have survivors or allies. He offers them 3 choices: go home, protect Proxima, or come along with the attacking fleet. The Heracles and its crew will have to answer for their actions ultimately, but that can't be done right now. The Heracles' first officer notes that he has the League behind him, so is puzzled as to why he's trying to recruit them. He says they won't intervene either way. He wants this to be a clean fight between Earth and Earth. The captains ask for time to consider their positions. On the station, Londo drinks alone until Jakar arrives further down the bar. He drinks his own drink before he acknowledges Londo and says that he will sign the joint proclamation he proposed, but not on the same page as Malari. Jakar then leaves, leaving Londo to consider what this means, and he reaches over to hold Jakar's glass in his hand. On the bridge of the White Star, Mackie says that the Heracles will retire for repairs and his captain will be held under house arrest until the war is over. One Omega will stay put to guard Proxima with other Earth forces Sheridan has called in, whilst he and another captain will sign on with Sheridan and offers him his hand. The Alexander from Severed Dreams is one of the ships we see out of the White Star's windows. Ivanova's Voice of the Resistance gives a fair account of the battle and announces that Proxima 3 is now free, at the same time asking any other friendly ships to come forward now. She is now in the background on monitors as Garibaldi leaves the station for what he tells the guard will be the last time as he heads to Mars. Ivanova closes her announcements on the Non-Centauri Declaration being signed in support of Sheridan's actions. And so it begins. We can pick up the pace again out of the embers of the Shadow War, which as Jakar notes Earth kept well out of, which of course means its forces are at full strength while everyone else is depleted, a fact that has helped Sheridan get his Mutual Defence Pact in place whilst asking the rest of the League to scrap theirs with Earth. It's a smart move of course for very obvious reasons. Sheridan only has a finite force to play with even if it's an advanced one, but at least if the League protect the station he has more forces to play with. It's nice to see Jakar back in diplomatic action, which in turn leads to the fascinating interplay between him and Londo in this episode. They do have one of the best/worst relationships in the series, and Londo essentially recaps that fact here as he tries to forge some sort of new relationship with Jakar as an equal, rather than a tortured prisoner as was the case a few weeks ago. And it's lovely to see Jakar in a raging, don't give a crap kind of mood with him, barely giving him the time of day despite his earnest entreaties. It's actually a very different Londo to the one we've seen of late, and whilst the old enmity is there, Londo clearly knows he owes Jakar, whether or not Jakar gives a damn. So this is a growth point for Londo, really. And it's not until the last moments of the episode that we see Jakar is big enough to acknowledge that the Declaration can help him help Sheridan, while still ensuring that he keeps himself aloof from Malari. It's a concession, yes, but a very guarded one. Londo clearly takes something from it, however, so it's a fascinating look at their relationship post the events of the first half of the season. We also get a little of the Garibaldi subplot too, with Veer's surprise at his attitude towards Sheridan's efforts to free Earth, and then out of the blue his departure from the station for Mars, presumably to finally meet up with his employer. Clearly with everything else going on, no one was about to challenge his departure, and it will be interesting to see how this path now unfolds. So, obviously the main event this episode is Sheridan kicking off his campaign in earnest, having moved his political pieces into position. The briefing he gives their forces with Ivanova is very interesting, and I was a little puzzled when he said this was going to be a difficult ask, but then I remembered the distinction between this and the Severed Dreams anti-Earth battle is them initiating the combat here rather than defending themselves and the station's inhabitants, hence Sheridan acknowledging this is a bigger ask in that sense. Still Minbari on the White Stars, interestingly, despite Sheridan saying he wants a clean fight. Is it sensible to paint a bullseye on your White Star? I'm not sure it matters in space combat really, unless you're gathering debris after the fact. One thing I'll note is that White Star 2 is of course so numbered because Sheridan blew the first one up over Zahadum. The other knock-on effect of that is that this ship is actually not as good as the original. Why, I hear you ask? Because Lanier has noted that the White Stars learn from what they're hit with and adapt to it. The first White Star had taken a few knocks, so its skin would have toughened up, whereas we don't know the history of this one, but it's presumably fresher. Not a major issue because they can self-repair, but thought I'd mention it. We know Sheridan likes this type of battle, but he's being pulled in a lot of different directions in trying not to alienate his own pilots and appearing too gung-ho, whilst also wanting to protect them when they are engaged, but simultaneously wanting to limit the body count on both sides. Big ask. And Ivanova is clearly not convinced that going in with the White Stars they have, and their fighters, is going to be enough against 6 Omegas and their fighters. Numerically, that's probably not great odds, which is why we see Sheridan spending a lot of time having Marcus gather intelligence before they engage, so that he has a reasonable idea of where to focus his firepower. It's actually quite fortunate that only half the opposing fleet actually offer resistance. Whilst I've expressed some reservations about the CGI this season, I think the engagement is well depicted here, and I'd particularly call out the use of new viewpoints and the view out of the White Star's forward windows as the battle progresses. It reminds you Sheridan's right there. There are also nice shots, such as the one with the Alexander, demonstrating that Sheridan's forces are already being bolstered beyond just White Stars and the station's forces, as other rebel ships join them. Earth doesn't really have an answer to the White Star as a ship type, but we're reminded in this episode that an Omega's firepower is still sufficient to hurt a White Star if it can hit it. The initial pulse cannon volley from the Heracles is pretty nasty, but of course the Omega's main weapons are forward and aft firing. They do have point defence turrets for greater midships coverage, but they can't bring as much fire to bear there. So if a White Star can get in close, avoiding their forward and rear arcs, then they can hit them with impunity once the point defence is down, which is of course why they carry fighter wings. So, whilst Marcus is upbeat about the outcome of the battle, Sheridan knows it gets harder from here on in. Here he had solid intelligence, and the 6 Omegas were trying to defend an entire planet from 3 different attack groups. That takes organisation, which they had time for this time round. It might not be the same scenario next time, nor do we know whether others' targets could be more fortified, although it's likely they will be now they know Sheridan is coming. It's also worth noting the internal power plays that went on in the Earthships over the course of the battle, because we can see this as exemplars for what might happen down the line as Sheridan continues to try and win hearts and minds as the campaign progresses. Interesting in the light of current events to note that soldiers are not automatons. They do have the ability to question their orders, although some may do so more than others of course. It's clearly a difficult choice for individuals who are trained to follow the chain of command, as the Babylon 5 command staff found when they declared independence. Not everyone was as confident as Corwin in following the moral authority of their immediate commanders. It would be interesting to know how often this does happen in real world situations. I also wonder what happened with the Juno here. It was the Omega that jumped out. Did it sit the rest of the war out somewhere, or did it go an internal power struggle too and come back in on one side or the other later? I guess abstention or plain simple surrender could be an option. One other thing I noticed in this episode is that the Babylon 5 Cobra bays are able to launch Thunderbolts, which makes perfect sense as you wouldn't want them to have different launch parameters to normal Star Furies. Just not sure if you would ever see them launching out before now. So we didn't see Delenn here, although you get the impression this all happened very rapidly after the events of the last episode, so she may not even have had time to get back from Minbar as yet, and may still need time to heal. So for the time being we can presumably expect focus to shift greatly onto the Earth Civil War now, back at full intensity after quite an extended pause after Severed Dreams last season. Where it lands, we'll see. Join me for the next one.